Behind me are some of the highest peaks in California, known as the 14ers for being more than 14,000 feet in elevation. Now, to get to this view, we climb above our destination for this trip, which is Sam Mack Meadow. Now, I've climbed all the 14ers here, but you know something? You really don't have to be so adventuresome to see the spectacular scenery here. You just have to come to the meadow. The hike begins at the Pine Creek Trailhead outside the town of Big Pine, California. The directions to the parking lot are in the description. Note the pack cover. It was drizzling rain when we started. So what? You're going to let that stop you? As a personal note, I began my hiking and climbing days in the Pacific Northwest, where if you canceled because of a little rain, you almost never got into the mountains. This is nothing. And no matter what the weather, get out the sunscreen. The trail climbs on an exposed slope for the first 3 miles. Plenty of time to fry those skin cells without that SPF 30. There are 2 trail junctions along the way, which we ignore. Then, about 2 miles into the hike, we enter the John Muir Wilderness, where dogs are allowed, but not bikes or any other mechanical device. A few pints of sweat later, we pass Second Falls on the North Fork of Big Pine Creek. From here, the trail continues up into North Fork Canyon, shaded by Jeffrey Pine and Aspen. And then, as the path levels off a bit at a woodsy area whimsically called Seneca Mirth, you might start to think to yourself, what a great place to build a cabin. After 3 miles of hiking and about 1,100 feet of elevation gain, we come to the Lon Chaney cabin. Now, given that Chaney lived more than 90 years ago, I don't expect too many people to remember that he was an actor in the silent movie era. At any rate, he hired a famous Black American architect named Paul Revere Williams to design the cabin, and then he built it between 1929 and 1930. The cost, $12,000, which in today's money is more than $206,000. Sadly, Chaney only spent a few months here with his wife Hazel. He fished for trout in Big Pine Creek, and she cooked them. And then he died in 1930. The Forest Service now owns the cabin, but seldom uses it. They're concerned it isn't safe anymore. Now, if you left too late in the day, which is what we did, then you can always camp here, and then go on to the meadow the next day. Actually, it's not a bad idea to camp here if you've got the extra time. After all, Chaney picked this spot for a reason. And that might not be clear if you simply pause for a snack before continuing up the trail. The place defines that cozy tranquility we come to the woods for. With the soothing 24-hour creek soundtrack erasing whatever troubles you might be experiencing in the real world, you can spend your thoughts on imagining what it might have been like for Lon and Hazel to hang out on the porch in the evening. I'm sure a century ago, moments of solitude like this were too rare, and nothing has changed. The next morning, we have more climbing with interludes of semi-level wooded stretches. About a mile and a half past the cabin, there's First Lake. Yeah, right. That's why they named it. And beyond it is Second Lake, a scene perfectly decorated with the multiple spires of Temple Crag. Continue ascending, sometimes with switchbacks, and again, ignore the side trails that come with the route. Until, that is, more than 6 miles from the trailhead, you hit this junction where you turn left for the final uphill section. It can be grueling, especially if you're doing the entire stretch in one day, but at least it's only 0.8 miles. Then we come to Sam Mack Meadow. At this sign, you'll find campsites tucked away in the pines. You are now at 11,000 feet in elevation, and what might be considered the gateway to the Palisades, those premier peaks for climbers. And for a base camp, the meadow is comfortable with meltwater from the Palisade Glacier for cooking. Across the canyon, always lurking, is Sky Haven with a summit of 12,840 feet. In the other direction, there's a rough use trail to Sam Mack Lake that requires some rock scrambling to reach. Strangely, there's no record of why this meadow was named after Sam Mack, or who this guy was. One theory has it that he was Captain Samuel Mack, who worked for the Mono County government in the late 1860s. If nothing else, there are 2 lakes north of here named after his daughters, Emma and Anna. But after that, the trivia trail goes cold. If you choose to spend more than one night at the meadow, or if you have more energy than most of us, try out the Glacier Trail that ends with a spectacular overlook above Palisade Glacier and Palisade Lake. Start from the trail sign across the creek and turn right on the trail that runs alongside the creek for a few feet before shooting left up into the trees and rocks. The climb, all 1,300 feet of it, follows a decent trail for more than a mile. Along the way, first, second, and third lakes show up below us. This view, in itself, is enough to justify hiking up here. Then the trail starts to get rougher. So rough, it has to be marked by cairns. And then the trail more or less disappears in a boulder field. Here, you can turn around if you're not comfortable boulder hopping, or keep going, following the cairns. They lead you to granite slabs. When the rocks are dry, most hiking shoes will stick to them. Just remember, you have to go back down, which could be unnerving for some. Finally, at the wheezing altitude of 12,300 feet, you'll crest on a ridge of rubble known as a glacial lateral moraine. And there it is, the glacier, the lake, and the spectacular ridge of 14ers known as the Palisades. Now be sure to give yourself enough time for returning. Finding cairns in the dark is near impossible. There's nothing complicated about returning to the trailhead. It's mostly downhill for about 7.5 miles. But don't be in such a hurry to get back to your car that you don't occasionally slow down to appreciate the encore views. So, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do. You know, I publish one hike each week. And in the meantime, go to the woods, no matter who you are.